Hey everybody, Professor Ghassemi here. Welcome back to another episode of AI Agents at Michigan State University. I'm extremely excited to have a participant as a guest lecturer today. Um, Specifically, I'm joined here by Sid Shenoy, who's the Vice President of Data and Analytics Technologies at WK, where he leads three strategic centers of excellence: AI, data, and patents. Prior to joining WK, Sid worked at Thomson Reuters for a decade, leading efforts in AI, product management, discoverability, and master data management. He has a PhD in biophysics from CMU as well. So super impressive guy. We're extremely excited that he's coming here to speak to all of us and educate me as well on uh, agentic design patterns, AI considerations in a real industrial setting. Sid, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. I've been following along, watching every video in your series, and I guess I've learned quite a bit. So enjoying
Oh,
this and
that is
hope to
super.
learn something today as well from you.
That is super kind. I really do appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. All of you who are listening here, who are taking the class officially, please remember that, right? If Sid liked it, then you all better give great reviews when it comes time.
Especially like, if I may take a second, the prompting one of the different techniques and all of that. I have not seen a more kind of robust walkthrough of all the methodologies and how they are, the taxonomy behind them and how to think about them. That was kind of clarifying for me because I knew all of the bits and pieces, but seeing them in one nice kind of organized manner suddenly made me go, aha, this is how things work.
I
So
really
appreciate
appreciate
that.
that. I really appreciate that. No, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, today, as much as I appreciate you giving me all this praise and credit, we're here to learn from you. And I know that you're joining us here today. I want to state this clearly for everybody in the audience. Sid is joining us just in his personal capacity as a good citizen. He's here to talk to all of you and educate you in that personal capacity. So nothing he's sharing today is meant to represent WK officially. He's rather just bringing us the experiences as a technologist and a person who thinks about these problems. So, Sid, what I'd like to do is start by having just a zooming out for a second, sort of tell us about some of your experiences in artificial intelligence broadly, so that as we get into specific questions around AI and AI agents specifically, the audience has a context for the kinds of things that you think about and your journey in the space. I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. So I think at Thomson Reuters, my very first job was we were getting shipping manifests from ports all over the US, and we had to decode what that text meant. And so I was working for the commodities department, which cares about crude oil, and they cared about, hey, does this shipping vessel have crude oil on it? And if so, what grade of crude, where it come from, things like that. And the vendor we had at that time was confusing heavy blend with heavy blend cotton t-shirts. So a whole bunch of t-shirts were tagged as crude oil, and it wasn't that. And so
Right.
my very first project was building a simple SVM to kind of give it some keywords and kind of figure out, hey, is it this or the other? And it was a really fun project that kind of got me going again, post my PhD and post my master's, my kind of first real world experience, if you will. And so from there, it's gone a long way. We're a long way away from SVMs, although it is important to remember that sometimes simple techniques actually are very powerful. They were much more reproducible than the generative AI tools today.
Right.
Although I had to kind of fine tune, massage a lot of work that today the Gen AI could probably do just like that with a snap of your finger. So it's the right tool for the right job, I guess, what I'm trying to say. So we've come from there to the world of traditional ML, which is where we've had a lot of experience building models that are very good in very specific areas. So at Wolters Kluwer, we've had products in the healthcare space, in the tax space, legal space, and as you can imagine, a lot of those things you need to do in terms of metadata tagging, in terms of searching. There are various things that show up in the UX as a piece of content, but behind the scenes, you have this whole machinery working. A lot of the data that we've had at Thomson Reuters or at Wolters Kluwer is usually public. So, like, technically, legal cases are public. It's a
Yeah.
pain to get a hold of them. It's a pain to clean them up. It's a pain to tag them in a way that you can actually search for them,
Mm.
but it's public. Same thing with journal articles. So you're a very distinguished person from a publication perspective. All of the things you publish are online. At least the title and abstract is usually public. The body may be copyrighted, but all that can be found online. But to actually get it, to understand it, to search it, to find the
Right.
networks and understand, is this something viable? Is this something that has actually been shared as a consensus by people? Is not easy to do. So I think the real value comes from not just throwing data at a person, but trying to say, how do you take that data? How do you contextualize it for what they're trying to achieve? And then now, today, especially, the goal is to go further than that and say, how do I help the person take this and do what they want them to do, which is kind of the agentic step, right? And so I think that's where things are really exciting, is building on everything we've done up to this point, but now taking the next step of being, instead of just being passive, actually making action-oriented, which at the end of the day is what we're all trying to do with our job, whether it's our customers. We all need data to take some action, make a decision, something. How do we cross that bridge from being passive to actually helping you get to that next step?
Yeah, now that makes a lot of sense. And actually, I love the direction you're taking this, because you're underscoring some of the practical considerations you have when you're building AI systems. I'd love if you could double click on that sort of and teach the audience, the students who are in the class, about, what are the steps you take when you're trying to approach building an AI system so that it's safe, so it's interpretable, so it's, aligned with your user workflows. Because, you're right. We've come a long way since the day of SVMs, when we could perfectly understand what these models do. LLMs, that's a little bit harder. And by a little, I really mean a lot. So I'm really curious if you could share wisdom from your experience about what are the practical things you do so it's safe, it's interpretable, and it's aligned with the workflows.
I tell people that I can build an agent that can do anything, but it's going to suck, because to actually make it a good agent is hard. And it reminds me of, if you remember from the cloud computing days, we still in cloud computing, but the days of migration to cloud, 99% uptime versus 99.9 versus 99. Every additional 9 you add is like an order of magnitude of more effort, right? So the initial 90% may be okay, but every bit after that is a hard fought battle. That's the same thing with agentic AI, which is, you get something that works 60, 70% accuracy, you can do that very easily. ChatGPT can probably do that for you. Everything beyond that, to get about 95%. And most of our customers, if you ask them, they'll say, what do you mean? We want it to be 100% accurate. You were giving us machine learning models that are 100% accurate. Why can't these work the same way, right? And they almost don't care what technology we use. They care about the output. And so their question is your trust and your brand behind this or not? Because if it's not, we now need to spend time double checking the work, and that's what we are paying you to do. We are paying you as a company to give us software or products or analytics that we can just trust and make decisions on, not say, great, let me now do some homework on what you just showed me. So I think that's the really hard part, is generative AI allows you to skip past a lot of things. Most companies have really messy data. Especially ones like Wolters Kluwer is 189 years old. Thomson Reuters is 175 years old. There are many companies out there, even who are 30 years old, that have a very, very messy data background. And so the challenge becomes, GenAI allows you to skip a couple of steps, because you don't need to pay thousands of people to start cleaning up your data. You can actually do some very nice massaging. The AI can kind of figure out some things that you can automate and kind of fix too. But then that gives the illusion that, hey, my messy data is good enough to kind of convert into production and do something fantastic with it. And that's where you run into trouble. So I think, to your original question of understanding quality and understanding what you're giving the hands of somebody, there are a couple of gates here. One is the data itself. Is the data itself of good enough quality to enable you to do what you want to? And we start with very quick experiments, because depending on what you're trying to achieve in the use case, it may be fine. Maybe getting it wrong 20% of the time is okay for the task you want, because wrong is very subjective, right? 1 + 1 is 2, but summarizing an email, it may probably be 5 different ways of summarizing it that may all be okay, depending on your use case. So I think it's very important to understand, what does good look like. So what we tell people internally when we kick off a project is, before we start, assume things go well in this project. What does good look like? If you can define for me and tell me, well, good means X, and we mean quantitative stuff, not just the customer likes it. We mean that, hey, these metrics are within these parameters, and this is the accuracy level, this is the F1 score, whatever measure you prefer, but these are the metrics we care about. And it's not just accuracy, because I call it the golden triangle or the iron triangle, which is you have accuracy, but you also have latency and you have cost. And usually you get only 2 of those 3 that you can pick. The third one's going to vary. So you love accuracy, highly accurate, very low latency, probably going to pay a ton of money, right? And so you need to figure out between those 3 pillars, what are you willing to compromise on and which ones are you not? Once you have that view of what those are, the harder part actually is figuring out how you measure those. So we've spent a lot of time internally kind of building what is now called evals, which is kind of a hip way of saying it. But evaluations are really, really important, because if you don't have that good way of measuring and calculating what your KPIs are, the KPI doesn't matter. You could say, I want this metric to be
Yeah.
99%, but I don't know how to measure it. It might as well not exist. So I think
Mm.
for us, it's more about starting off. Do you know what good looks like? How would you measure it? Do quick experiments to figure out where do you start off. If you start off at 90% accuracy or whatever the metric is, you're actually in really good shape. If you're at
Right.
60%, okay, now it's going to require some work. So we highly recommend time-boxed 1-month experiments to kind of try something,
Right.
see how it works, and then at that point reevaluate and figure out, are you going to progress or not, and make quick decisions. But speed, unfortunately, has become a big focus areas. And the reason I say unfortunately is that speed and accuracy usually don't go together. Customers now are expecting you to have new improvements almost every week.
Yeah.
And to do that at scale in production in a corporate setting, especially if you're in a regulated industry, is very, very hard to do. How do you make sure you're able to balance accuracy with that? So again, I just mentioned some of that quality metrics
Yeah.
pre-production. There's a whole bunch we can talk about post-production to kind of monitor and make sure the guardrails are in place and all that good stuff. But I think it always starts with the data, and it always starts with, do you know what you're trying to achieve and what does good look like for you?
Yeah. By the way, I really love, I think you referred to it as the iron triangle. So speed, accuracy, and cost. And you got to choose two of the three. I'm really curious because you have such a rich career in having done this across a variety of industries. I mean, what do you find are the sort of the meta considerations of a problem that makes people lean into two of those at the cost of one of the others? I mean, and any sort of guiding principles that you've observed or reflecting on? I mean, I'd be curious to hear that.
Absolutely. I think a perfect example is in the healthcare space. Most doctors in the United States have about a minute with a patient. In that
Right.
minute, you need to look at what's the patient come with, what is the situation, and what do I need to do as next steps? Is it a test I need to order? Is it a diagnosis I have to make? Is it a referral for something else? If I come up with an AI solution that's going to take 5 minutes to recommend something with 100% accuracy, doctors may still say not good enough because I don't have those 5 minutes, right? So that's a case where accuracy is really important, but time matters too. They of course want accuracy, but I think that you have to fit in the constraints of the visit that the patient's coming in. So
Mm.
understanding the context of the user, of what they're playing with, is really important. The flip side of that is in the legal space. So we have lawyers, for instance, who write documents and drafts. A
Mm.
new regulation comes up, which might mean that some paragraph in some document needs to be updated. That could be an overnight job that runs once a day, that checks your documents, comes and flags things. And the next morning you show up to work, it's like, hey, this paragraph may need to be reviewed. That could have taken an hour of computation. It could
Right.
have been distributed low cost when the kind of cost is low on
Right.
some of the
Right.
networks, and the customer is completely fine with it. So I think we see a wide variety of use cases, and the question is your product being used at the time of making a key decision, in which case your time isn't in your favor, as opposed to something that can happen asynchronously and that buys you a lot more time.
Mm.
Things like deep research that everyone has nowadays as well. The
Yeah.
expectation is deep research works if you have enough time. If you're willing
Mm.
to wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an
Yeah.
hour, whatever it might be, if you're willing to wait, you get a much more robust, iterative kind of solution. So I think
Yeah.
it always starts with what is the context that the customer is in or the user is in, what really matters to them. From our perspective, usually we try and optimize for accuracy. We say, let's make sure we get the best accuracy out of the gate as possible, because if your solution isn't accurate enough based on what the metric is, there's no point proceeding. So use the most expensive LLM,
Right.
use
Right.
something that takes forever to run, that's fine. If you still cannot get the accuracy you want, maybe your project is in serious jeopardy. But if you can get the accuracy,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
start fiddling with, okay, now can we move to a
Now
cheaper
we can
LLM,
optimize
or
these
can we
other
optimize?
axes. Yeah.
Exactly. But usually we kind of, our bias is towards
Yeah.
accuracy because that's kind of the industries we serve.
No, I love that. I love that. So I think you've touched on really an important aspect of the human AI collaboration process, which is, you know, AI systems are only going to get deployed insofar as they are practically useful per some key performance indicators that individual companies, individual project leads care about. I think that's a useful thing actually for all of you in the class to be aware of, especially because a sizable portion of the people in the class they're seniors actually in computer science. They're looking for jobs. So I'd like to actually spend a couple of minutes picking your brain, or rather having you give advice to the people who are very close to their graduation. So, you've played lots of roles. You have a prominent position at a company that has a large AI footprint. Tell me, like, what are the skills you think a fresh college grad in something like computer science needs to get good at so that as AI agents continue to get faster, more accurate at cheaper costs. Those are your three axes. How do they continue to, be part of the value proposition back to a potential employer? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think the kind of loudest voice in this topic is you see in the media is, hey, we don't need people who are kind of joining the workforce. We're going to cut those jobs and we only need experienced people, right? And the response to that is, well, where do you get the experience from if there aren't any entry level jobs, right? So
You're
you
right.
can run off people very, very quickly and you won't have a company anymore. The way I see it is kind of in a couple of fronts. One is we're actually seeing that some of the most promising engineers, if you pick computer science as an example, some of the most prominent and really high performing teams are actually composed of fresh grads or young grads. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is one, you're passionate, you're energetic, you're looking to learn and do new things. Two, you're not kind of shackled by some of the ways we've designed stuff and built stuff in the past. And so we are, as with most things, people is usually the hardest part of any problem. Like
Yeah.
process technology, yes, but it's the people, the mindset shift. If you've done a project a particular way for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, coming up with a brand new way of doing something is hard. It's really hard as a human. We love status quo. We love kind of things that are consistent. So
Yeah.
having someone come in with fresh pair of eyes is actually amazing. And so, side note, we actually have a program where we partner with universities every semester for capstone projects. And the reason we do that is specifically to get students who have an external perspective to come in. We try not to bias them. We don't tell them how we would have made a decision. We try to give them the minimal guidance from our side, but help them enough to make progress over
Hmm.
the course of the 3 months. But the view is, what insights can they bring? And sometimes it's fascinating because you get so immersed in it in the day to day, it's hard to take a step back and say, we could actually reimagine all of this. So I think there's a lot going for a new grad in the sense that they're not tainted by years or decades of an organization doing something a particular way. I think what's challenging is the fact that what I like to say is discernment is going to be actually one of the most important skills going forward, which is AI is going to be able to do anything. And it's going to give you an
Hmm.
answer for any question you ask it. How do you know if that's good or not? That kind of critical eye, that kind of critical thinking of saying, great, I've got an answer now, which maybe I couldn't have done or taken me weeks to do. I've got an answer. How do I know if it's good enough? How do I know if it's
Hmm.
complete enough? Those kind of things. And so that is an area where you need to learn as young as possible in school, in
Yeah.
college, build those skills of critical thinking. It's really, really important. But then ideally, as you join an entry-level job, you're able to pick up and figure out what does that critical thinking mean in the field of my choice or in the area of my choice. If I'm a
Yeah.
programmer, a developer, I'm looking at some code that Claude code or something else wrote for me. How do I know what's accurate? What I need to double check? Hey, I need the hygiene of creating good unit tests to double check things, right?
Right.
That is what you will learn per job family. So I think a lot of good things working for students. I think the fear that AI is taking everyone's jobs isn't real yet, but it will be. People who know how to use AI will outsurpass people who don't know how to use AI. So I think for everyone in your class, for instance, I think would strongly urge them to understand the basics of
Yeah.
generative AI, play around with the agents. Again, they're doing a lot in your class as well, but understanding how this technology works so that when you join a company and hit the ground running, it's amazing. One last thing I'll just say is that the coolest thing about generative AI is that if anyone says they're more than 3 years of practical work experience, they're lying. So it's been an amazing kind of level setting, right, for everybody to
Right.
say that that's the most experience you can be. Now, I'm joking a little bit, like it's not about Gen AI showing up on day one. It's been around a little bit for a while, and knowing some of the foundations in ML will actually
Right.
help you. So I'm
But
being a little
but in a
facetious, but
practical
in a
industrial
practical
context,
industrial sense. So
yeah.
I've actually had to strike down resumes where, my HR team or something comes up and says, hey, you need 7 years of experience in blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, did not exist more than 3 years ago, right? And
Yeah.
so that is an amazing opportunity for someone as a new grad because the bar of what you need to know and the experience level has suddenly been
Yeah.
dropped. You can only be 3 years behind the most experienced person in the field in some
Right.
sense. That isn't so bad. You can catch up and make immediate progress. And companies are looking for individuals who can come in and say, I know enough to hit the ground running and learn as I go. So
Yeah.
last comment I'll make, as I promised, is that spirit of learning. And unfortunately or fortunately, like the further you get away from graduating, that spirit of learning can sometimes get buried by just the day-to-day routine of work. I think as a fresh graduate, you have that spirit of I'm used to learning. I'm used to learning new things, absorbing new things. That's what companies really need at this day and time.
Yeah. It really stuck with me the point you made about discernment, that there are a set of skills, some of them are related to core content. And traditionally within academic ecosystems, including the place I teach, we're trying to teach students content mastery. That's traditional. But discernment is sort of a meta skill that isn't something so much that you formally teach, but is more a way of being. Right? It's almost like a way of life. So I'm curious, in addition to discernment, and you did mention some other things that sort of are nested under that, good hygiene practices, writing your unit tests effectively, and so on, that fall under the domain of practice. I wonder if there's some other kind of ways of approaching things, characteristics that are useful as we enter a world where increasingly, AI agents are playing roles in executing workflows. And I agree with you that there's a reality in the job markets that's placing some pressure on people who are just fresh grads, not only because of some of the factors you mentioned, where the requirements are getting steeper, but because increasingly the very simple tasks that maybe an entry-level grad would be asked to do can increasingly be performed in a highly accurate, highly cost-effective, and very fast way, to stick with your three pillars, using AI. So I'm curious about some of these other properties, things you've integrated across in your experience. Discernment seems like a really valuable one. Do you have thoughts on other axes that folks should be thinking about?
The other one I mentioned, as I said already, was about learning. For me, I started off in the commodity space, not knowing anything about crude oil or that there are 995 grades of crude oil or which countries they come from, right?
Right.
And I had to learn and pick it up within a month so that I could actually create solutions that were impactful and effective. So that idea of always wanting to learn. After this space, I moved to the financial space. I was building a product to compete with Bloomberg's terminal. I did a mini CFA because I wanted to understand what's the world of finance. Like, I've heard of all these
Right.
words and terms. I want to learn them the proper way. So I think just being open, both from a content perspective of what's the domain you're working in, but then also the technology. So both are important and go hand in hand. If you're just one or the other, that's fine. But I think to be truly successful, you really need to open yourself up to both and be able to quickly absorb them. Quick sidebar, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, our thesis, when you have to graduate from the coursework part to actually becoming a true PhD candidate, we had an exam, a qualified exam, which was right before Christmas. They would give you 10 papers on a topic that ideally no one's heard about. You spend the Christmas break learning about it, and you have to present on it for 1 hour in front of a committee of people. And the idea was, in that 1 or 2 weeks, how quickly can you understand the fundamentals of something? You won't know everything about the field. It's not enough to do that in 2 weeks, but enough to have a cogent, coherent conversation with somebody, answer some questions. We hated that. We were like, this is torture. Like, why wouldn't you quiz me on something I care about, I'm passionate about? My topic, I think, was gravitational waves, which now are very common and popular. But back then, it was a theory, purely a theory. People had heard about the word but knew nothing about it. I was like, I'm never going to work on gravitational waves. Why should I defend this topic for an hour? But that was actually an amazing life lesson for me now in retrospect, in terms of quickly being able to look at a topic, which have decades of work behind it, but being able to absorb key facts from it and understand what this is about and how to kind of present it. And so I think very valuable skill that you learn in academia that can transfer very well. And I think going back to your original question of kind of the axes in terms of looking at things, the other one I think is, where does human intervention or knowledge or experience start, and where does the AI start? So there's certain use cases where you want the AI to take a first crack at something. There are other cases where you want to do the first draft. You want to make sure all of your points are in, and then you may say, hey, AI, help me now execute on this, or give me a different way of saying this, or whatever it might be. That's a very tricky balance to strike. It depends on the use case, depends on how valuable your time is, and many different things like that. I think making sure you can strike that right balance is important. Simple example, when you write an email, you say AI respond to an email. If it's a one-line reply, it probably gets a really good way of doing it. If it's longer than that, it's going to miss things because it won't know what's in your head. So it's usually good to take a first draft, a first pass yourself, and then say, okay, now using the information I've given you, nothing external maybe, kind of give me an answer here. So I think being able to figure out and kind of filter, where do you use your expertise and knowledge? Where does AI come in? You mentioned kind of human AI collaboration. I think there's a paper from MIT maybe about they call it the centaur, half human, half machine hybrid, right? That's not an easy balance to strike, and it varies by use case. The very last thing I'll say is that this whole field is moving exponentially, right? And so every day there is a new article, a new paper, a new capability or technology. It's hard to keep up. And so I think just being able to understand what are the advancements that matter to you, what are the advancements that don't matter yet. Again, depending on where you are, they may be very different. If you're the cutting edge in a frontier lab, you want to know what the latest research is. If you're someone like me who's in an institution that actually is kind of creating brand new products for our customers, you want to be well vetted before you can actually integrate it. If it's just a beta feature that someone's giving you or a trial of something, not good enough. Good to know it exists, and maybe research is going down that path, but maybe not actionable enough. How do you kind of balance all of these? So I think understanding the discernment feature, being able to learn not just the technology, but the domain you're immersed in, and then being able to figure out what are the changes that are happening on a day-to-day basis you should care about and which ones you should ignore. That filter, I think, is really important.
Yeah. No, that's phenomenal. So I really appreciate this. So in addition to discernment, there's two, if I had to pull keywords out of your response, I would say there's discernment, there's delegation, which is knowing when you pass and when you don't. And then there's also distillation. When you spoke about taking very large amounts of information, you're not going to learn everything, but you want to be able to distill out of it enough knowledge so that maybe you can perform that discernment and delegation as well.
Look at that, you got all 3Ds, you got them to match.
I
Very
got
nice.
them to match. You see that? Pretty good, right? The OG Gen AI, right? Sitting right up here. Yeah, no, that's great. Awesome. Okay, so one last kind of direction of conversation that I think would be helpful for people to hear about. The tooling in this space is obviously evolving very quickly as well. And so as we've gone through in the class, the development of AI agents, we've been speaking, very intentionally about agentic design principles and patterns. So that includes how do you do your prompt engineering effectively? What do the actual studies say matter and don't matter when you're performing prompt engineering? Are there, does reflection, for example, having a separate agent that criticizes the outputs end up improving the performance? And if so, in what contexts? When do you call tools versus not? How do you design a RAG system so that it gets you a lift and doesn't just, sit you at the same performance for an added cost? So we've tried to think through these things sort of theoretically, which I think is important for assisting with the discernment, the delegation, and the distillation at just a raw knowledge-based level. But you had also mentioned that in addition to these capabilities, there's skills, obviously, people need in order to be a productive member of a team in a corporate setting. And so I'm curious, like, if you had to give advice to people in the class on what sort of tooling you're seeing in the AI space, and maybe if you can or are comfortable focusing on AI agents specifically, what sorts of tooling are you seeing is more valuable, is more employable, is in demand? Is it N8N? Or is it LangChain, right? I mean, any sorts of guidance or thoughts from you, I think, would be really helpful to the class.
At a very high level, I would say don't get hung up on the tools. And I mean this because in a company that has a long procurement process, as all the companies I've worked at, if you're learning that by the time you select a tool, it is no longer the one that is considered best in class, right? We've actually really challenged our procurement teams in this area. And so we've learned it the hard way, which is tools are going to evolve on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? Focus less on the tools. One, focus on learning. So when you want to learn something, it doesn't matter which tools you use. It's about understanding, hey, this is an agent orchestration platform. There may be 5 of them. Pick one, right? It doesn't have to be the number one today. It may not be the number one tomorrow. Play with it. Understand how it works. That kind of core fundamental understanding is what's invaluable. Not the how does it work in N8N or how does it work in LangChain. It's more of how do you use something like this? What does it look like? Your project in a company may be very different. Each corporation may have chosen perhaps its own preferred stack, but being able to say, I have been able to build this, I know how these systems work, I know what a orchestrator does and when handoffs happen, how you control that, that's invaluable, right? So it's almost like saying, which programming language should you choose, right? Sure, you may have your preference, but it's the underlying understanding of what does programming even mean? How do you get your thoughts into a manner that you can express to a machine logically what they are and break them into steps, being able to test them? Same thing here. Having said that, of course, there are certain tools that are kind of popular, things like LangChain, as you mentioned, which are kind of really dominant right now as kind of the underlying basis of no matter what you do, you may use it. MCP is currently quite hip in terms of how you actually do tool calling. So there may be a good stab you could take at what could be a dominant player even 6 months from now, and you try and learn those capabilities. But like when we are hiring, as an example, it doesn't matter whether it's N8N or LangChain or MCP or whatever buzzword it is. We're looking for, have you got that experience, right? Even if it's a platform or choice we have not adopted, if you can prove you have built some of these things at a large scale, you understand how it works, it's really invaluable. Two other quick comments. You mentioned about students learning. It's really important to learn how these things work, but it's also really important to understand when they break down what the challenges are. So going back to my earlier comment, it's very easy to put together things very quickly together and have something run and work. It's only when you do it at a larger scale, you realize, hey, you know what? I built a solution that when I have 10 documents in my RAG index works in 1 millisecond. I put 10 million documents and suddenly it crumbles, right? So, and again,
Right.
there are open source text documents and stacks where you can put 10 million documents or 100 million documents. So it's not like you don't have access to these things. I think a company like mine, for instance, would really value someone coming and saying, not only have I built something that seems to work, but I've tested it at a scale that matters, at a latency matters, again, the same iron triangle we talked about. And I've learned that, hey, to optimize, here's what I need to do. So building something, great, but anyone can build something very quickly. It's that optimization, that hardening of something for production that really matters. The more as a student you can show a company that you've actually thought through those steps, that's what we really value. So not just what is the RAG 101, dumping something to vector index, it's everything else that follows from that. How do you think about your chunking? Did you go with the default logic? Or did you do something different? Why did you do something different? What resulted in you iterating and changing that methodology or that formula, right?
Yeah.
Did you use an LLM, do you GPT-4.1 or use Anthropic Claude? Why? What made you change your mind, right? So it's those kind of decisions. If you can think about, I chose something, great. I then came up with the result and I iterated and made changes. That's the level we want people to get to as a company and hear their thoughts on it, which really matters. So don't get hung up on the tools. Tools are going to keep changing. It's an underlying knowledge of what does a tool do for me? And then where do I use it to actually kind of figure out that hardening, like kind of breaking down barriers to get to production. It's very, very hard to get agentic AI in production at scale. Very few companies have done it. Everyone calls things agents, and they may be like the simplest kind of agents, but true agents that go out there and do things autonomously, and especially multi-step agents, is very, very rare in the industry, in any industry, where people trust it in production at scale.
Right. Well, Dr. Shenoy, I want to say this has been phenomenally educational, definitely for me, and I guarantee you it will be for everybody in the class. I want to say a heartfelt thank you for taking time to educate all of us. This was really such a sincere pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I hope it was useful to the students. I know it was a fun conversation. It's always fun chatting with you and really enjoyed this. So thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Speak soon.